Divorce can break you. But for me, it didn't break me. It lit a fire inside. He thought he could hide $100,000 from me, thinking I was too naive to see the truth. But what he didn't count on? I wasn't as powerless as he thought. And what seemed like his biggest victory turned out to be his biggest mistake. I was about to turn the tables in a way he never saw coming. When I first found out about the hidden money, I thought it was a mistake. My ex-husband, Jason, wasn't exactly the most transparent person, but I never imagined he could deceive me in such a profound way. Our marriage had been full of ups and downs, but we had always agreed on fairness and equality. We promised each other that if anything happened, we would keep things civil, especially when it came to the finances. But then the divorce proceedings began, and everything I thought I knew about Jason, everything I thought I knew about our marriage, crumbled like a house of cards. At first, he seemed so calm, so confident. He presented all the documents, the legal papers, and the shared assets with such ease. He made it seem like everything was already taken care of. But there was something that didn't sit right with me. The more I looked over the documents, the more I felt something was off. It was his attitude that gave him away, the way he dismissed me, the way he assumed I would just accept whatever he handed over. He truly believed that I was too naive to see through his act, too blind to catch on to his lies. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something had been hidden from me all along. It wasn't just the typical manipulation I had grown used to over the years. It was something much deeper. And it didn't take long for me to start putting the pieces together. I started digging. Little things kept bothering me. Why did Jason have a secretive phone call that he quickly ended the moment I walked into the room? Why did he always seem so focused on maintaining control of our joint savings account? I knew he had always been cautious with money, but there was an underlying tension now, something I couldn't ignore. It felt like he was hiding something from me, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. So I started looking through our financial records, combing through old statements, trying to piece together the discrepancies. As the days went by, I dug deeper into our assets, our properties, and our bank accounts. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I had a gut feeling that something was there, something he had been deliberately trying to conceal. The more I investigated, the clearer it became that Jason had stashed away a large sum of money, and not just any small amount, but $100,000. It was a bank account that had been opened in his name alone, an account he had failed to disclose in our divorce proceedings. It was an amount that was not accounted for in any of the documents he had presented to our lawyer. And the worst part? He had been diverting money from our joint account into this secret account for months, maybe even years. The shock of it hit me like a wave, knocking the breath out of my chest. I couldn't believe it. After everything we had been through, the shared dreams, the years of building a life together, he thought I wouldn't notice. He thought he could get away with it, hide the truth from me and walk away scot-free. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't just the woman he had once married. I wasn't the naive, submissive partner he had manipulated for so long. I was stronger than he realized. And this betrayal, this deception, was the spark that would ignite something I hadn't even known I was capable of: fighting back. As the truth settled in, I felt a mix of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. The man I had once trusted had betrayed me. Not just emotionally, but financially as well. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about money. It was about power. It was about control. And Jason had underestimated me. He had made a fatal mistake, thinking I would just roll over and accept his lies. Now that I knew the truth, I couldn't let it slide. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. This wasn't just about me getting the money I was owed. It was about standing up for myself, taking control of my future, and showing Jason that he couldn't manipulate me anymore. As the days dragged on, Jason's confidence only grew. He seemed completely unbothered by the mounting tension around the divorce proceedings. Every time we met to discuss the settlement, he was calm, almost smug, as if everything was already in the bag. To him, I was just a woman scorned, desperate to cling to what little we had left. He didn't think I had the intelligence or the will to fight back. He thought I was too naive to notice the small details, to question the documents, to dig deeper. It wasn't the first time Jason had underestimated me, but this time it was different. He had assumed that, like every other time, I would simply accept his version of events, that I would quietly agree with whatever deal he presented, letting him walk away with the lion's share. After all, we had been married for over 10 years. What did I know about handling finances, about the hidden accounts and investments? He thought he was playing the game, and I was simply a pawn. But what Jason didn't count on was my determination, my quiet strength that he had always overlooked. He had never taken the time to truly see me, the person who had been underestimated, ignored, and sidelined for so many years. And now, for the first time in my life, I wasn't letting him control me. I wasn't going to sit back and let him manipulate me into thinking that I was powerless. The more he brushed me off, the more I dug into our finances. I had always been responsible with money, had always managed the household accounts while he made most of the big decisions. But I had never known about the secret accounts, the hidden investments, and I was determined to find out what else he had been hiding. It wasn't long before I found a strange discrepancy in one of our joint accounts. Small deposits from a source I didn't recognize. They weren't much at first, but the pattern was clear. He was funneling money into this account for months, and the sums were starting to add up. The first thing I did was hire a private investigator to trace the origin of the deposits. What I discovered sent chills down my spine. The money was coming from an offshore account he had opened in his name, and the account was tied to a company that didn't exist on paper, at least not officially. My blood ran cold. Jason had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide his wealth. This wasn't just a simple case of hiding some money from me. It was a full-fledged operation. But I wasn't backing down now. I had found the first piece of the puzzle, and I wasn't going to stop until I had it all. At the same time, Jason's smug attitude continued. He seemed so confident in the proceedings, acting as if the settlement was a done deal. He kept insisting that everything would go smoothly. Every time we spoke, he was more condescending, telling me how I should just take what was offered to me and move on with my life. He thought he had won. But I could see the cracks in his facade. His overconfidence was starting to slip. He had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated me. I started playing my own game, quietly and strategically. I gathered every piece of information, every document, and every lead I could find. I wasn't just going to expose him for hiding the $100,000. I was going to tear down his entire web of lies. I contacted my lawyer and began to prepare for the showdown. I knew I had the upper hand now, and I wasn't about to let him think he could walk away unscathed. As I delved deeper into the investigation, I began to uncover more disturbing details. Jason had been siphoning off money for years, hiding it in various accounts, masking it under fake business expenses. He had used my trust, my dedication to the family, to cover up his betrayal. He had thought I wouldn't question his actions because he had controlled the narrative for so long. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized how much I had been blindsided. He had not only betrayed me emotionally, but he had used me as a pawn in his game of financial manipulation. And now, with every document I found, every secret I exposed, I felt like I was regaining the power I had lost. Jason had thought I was weak. He had thought I wouldn't fight back. But he had made the mistake of thinking I was ignorant. It was time to flip the script. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. The man who thought he could hide behind his lies, who thought he could manipulate me for his own gain, was about to be exposed in a way he never expected. And I was going to make sure that everyone, especially him, knew just how far he had gone to deceive me. The final confrontation was looming, and I could feel the excitement building inside me. I wasn't just going to expose the hidden money, I was going to make Jason regret underestimating me. His arrogance, his confidence, was about to cost him everything. The deeper I went into Jason's lies, the more I realized how far he had gone to deceive me. The truth was unfolding in front of me, piece by piece, and every new revelation made my heart race. The private investigator I hired had started tracing the suspicious deposits in our joint account, and the more I learned, the more I saw just how much he had been hiding. The offshore account, the fake business expenses, the hidden assets. Jason's deception was far more intricate than I could have imagined. I had always trusted Jason. He had always been the one who made the big decisions, the one who controlled the finances while I handled the household. I never questioned him, never thought that he could be hiding something so massive. But now, as I pieced together the truth, the weight of his betrayal hit me harder than I could have prepared for. The money wasn't just $100,000, it was more, a lot more. And the fact that he thought he could hide it from me, that he believed I wouldn't catch on, made the situation even more infuriating. The private investigator had traced the funds back to several accounts, all connected to shell companies and offshore trusts, all designed to cover his tracks. And the worst part? He had been using our shared money to fund these secret accounts, funneling money out of our savings without my knowledge. The scale of his deception was beyond anything I had ever expected. I spent nights combing through financial statements, using the documents the investigator provided to match up the inconsistencies I had found. Every time I uncovered a new detail, my anger grew. Jason had been living a double life, and I had been living in the dark. He had been siphoning money from our marriage for years, all while pretending to be the loving, caring husband. He had used me, my trust, to create a secret financial empire. I knew I had to act fast. Jason's arrogance had led him to think I wouldn't find out. But now that I had the truth, I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The next step was to confront him, to expose him for the manipulative liar he was. But I couldn't do it recklessly. I had to be smart about it. If I was going to bring him down, I had to make sure I had all the evidence, all the ammunition, to ensure that he couldn't weasel his way out of it. I gathered everything I had, documents, statements, and records, and prepared for the confrontation. The longer I waited, the more the frustration built inside me. Jason thought he had outsmarted me, that he could leave me with nothing while he walked away with everything. But what he didn't realize was that he had underestimated me. I had been quiet for so long, but now I was ready to speak up. I was ready to fight for what was mine. The day came when I finally had enough evidence to confront him. I was nervous, yes, but I was also calm. I knew what I had to do. Jason had spent so much time hiding his deceit, but I wasn't going to let him continue to control the narrative. It was time for the truth to come out. I wasn't going to let him make a fool of me any longer. I called him, asking him to meet me at the lawyer's office. I knew it would be the perfect place for this conversation. He wouldn't be able to wiggle his way out of the truth in front of a legal professional. When he arrived, he looked confident, even smug, as though he had already won the divorce battle. But I could see it in his eyes. There was a flicker of uncertainty. He knew something was different. He knew something had changed. As we sat down across from each other, I didn't waste any time. I slid the folder across the table, watching as Jason's face changed when he saw the documents inside. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at the papers, his expression hardening with every page he turned. The shock on his face was priceless. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to the evidence I had laid out in front of him. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" I asked, my voice steady but filled with a quiet fury. Did you think you could just take what's mine and hide it from me without consequences? He didn't answer right away. I could see the panic rising in his eyes, the realization that his lies were finally catching up with him. He had spent so long controlling everything, believing that he could manipulate me into thinking I didn't know what was going on. But now, the tables had turned. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he said finally, his voice weak. I never wanted to hurt you. But it was too late. I wasn't interested in his excuses anymore. I had spent too many years being overlooked, being dismissed. Now I had the upper hand, and I wasn't going to let him escape without facing the consequences. I think you've done enough damage, I said, my voice firm. Now it's time for you to deal with the truth. The shock on his face was evident. He had thought he could play me, that he could outsmart me. But I wasn't the naive woman he had once known. I had found the truth, and now I was in control. The confrontation with Jason wasn't as dramatic as I had imagined it in my head. I thought I'd feel a rush of satisfaction, a triumphant sense of victory when I finally exposed his lies. But the reality was different. As I watched him process the evidence I had given him, all I could feel was cold clarity. There was no need for theatrics. The truth spoke for itself. He had underestimated me, and now there was no way for him to escape the consequences of his actions. He looked at the pile of documents, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time, I could see the facade of confidence he had always worn crack. The man who had once been so sure of himself, who had believed he could control everything and everyone around him, was now visibly shaken. He sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, clearly trying to process the reality of what had just unfolded. You really think you can get away with this? I asked, my voice steady. I wasn't about to let him play the victim, not when he had been the one pulling the strings all along. I had the evidence now. I had been patient, strategic, and relentless in my pursuit of the truth. He could no longer deny what he had done. Jason took a deep breath, his face tightening with frustration. Look, he said, his voice shaky but defensive. This isn't what you think. I was just trying to protect us. I didn't want to drag you into this mess. Protect us? I echoed, incredulous. By lying to me? By hiding money from me? By treating me like I was too dumb to notice? He opened his mouth to say something, but the words caught in his throat. For once, he didn't have a clever retort, a defense, or an excuse. He was backed into a corner, and he knew it. The smug, arrogant man I had married was nowhere to be found. He was just a man who had been exposed for his lies, and he wasn't handling it well. You've lied to me for years, Jason. All of this time, I thought we were building something together, but you've been planning your escape. You thought you could take everything from me, my trust, my dignity, and my money, and walk away with no consequences. Well, you were wrong. He looked away, clearly uncomfortable under my steady gaze. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought you wouldn't find out. You always trusted me so much, and His voice trailed off, and I could see the guilt in his eyes. Well, you underestimated me, I said, my tone sharp. And now you're going to pay the price. The silence in the room was deafening. The weight of the moment hung heavily between us, and for the first time, I could see the cracks in his confident exterior. This wasn't the man I had married, the man who always had an answer for everything. This was someone who was caught, someone who had been exposed for the deceitful, manipulative person he truly was. I pushed the pile of documents toward him, forcing him to face the reality of what he had done. You can't just pretend this isn't happening. This isn't something you can sweep under the rug. I'm taking this to the court. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. Jason's face paled as the gravity of the situation sunk in. Please don't do this. We don't have to go this far. I can give you the money. I'll make it right. But his words rang hollow. I had spent so many years trying to get him to be honest with me, trying to get him to see me as an equal, as someone whose feelings and rights mattered. But now, with everything exposed, I realized that I didn't need him to make things right. I was already taking control. No, Jason, this is about more than just money. This is about respect, about fairness. You thought I would just accept being treated like I was nothing. Well, not anymore. You don't get to decide what happens to me. I do. His face twisted with frustration. You're just going to walk away with everything then? You're going to ruin me? No, I'm going to expose you for who you really are, I said, my voice cold and steady. And for the first time, I'm going to make sure you understand what it's like to lose everything. He slumped in his chair, defeated. It wasn't the reaction I had expected. I thought I would feel a sense of triumph, a rush of satisfaction as I watched him squirm, but instead I just felt a deep sense of finality. The battle wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about regaining my life, my dignity, and my self-respect. I'm done, I added quietly, standing up. I've fought for so long to be heard, to be seen, to be respected. But now the truth is out, and I'm walking away from this marriage with my head held high. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I glanced back at him. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw the broken man he had become. But there was no pity in me, no compassion. I had already moved on. The truth had set me free. And now, Jason would have to face the consequences of his actions. The aftermath of exposing Jason's lies was far from simple. There was no immediate celebration, no sense of complete closure that I had expected. Instead, there was a surreal silence, a quiet sense of victory that settled over me, but also the lingering weight of everything I had uncovered. I had uncovered Jason's hidden fortune, exposed his lies, and watched him crumble before me. Yet, as I walked out of the confrontation, something inside me felt different. I had anticipated a sense of triumph, but I wasn't sure if it was the victory I had imagined. Days turned into weeks, and the divorce proceedings continued. Jason did everything in his power to make things go smoothly for himself, trying to bargain and negotiate with me, offering me the money he had hidden. But I wasn't interested in his half-hearted attempts to salvage the situation. The financial gain wasn't what mattered anymore. The emotional healing was what I needed, and I was taking control of that now. In the weeks that followed, I began to realize that this wasn't just about money. It wasn't about the revenge or the satisfaction of proving him wrong. It was about reclaiming my own power, my own life, and my own dignity. Jason had tried to break me, to manipulate me into staying in a marriage that no longer worked. He had thought he could control everything, our finances, my life, my choices. But what he didn't understand was that I was never truly powerless. I thought about all the years I had spent walking on eggshells, trying to please him, trying to be the perfect wife, only to have him constantly undervalue me. And now, for the first time, I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't clinging to the scraps he left me. I was standing on my own, strong and confident in the face of everything he had done. As the final settlement came closer, I felt a strange sense of peace. I didn't feel the need to seek vengeance, to make him suffer as much as he had made me suffer. The truth had already been exposed. Jason's mask had fallen, and the world now knew who he truly was, and that, in itself, was enough. The moment I signed the final divorce papers was one of the most liberating moments of my life. I felt a sense of finality, as though everything I had endured was finally behind me. There would be no more manipulation, no more pretending that everything was fine. I had taken back control of my life, and now I was free. The financial settlement was significant, but it wasn't about the money anymore. What mattered was that I had proven myself, proven that I wasn't just a passive participant in my own life. I wasn't the weak woman Jason had thought I was. I had risen above his deceit and taken the steps necessary to move forward. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything I had learned. I wasn't just proud of the money I had won or the justice I had achieved. I was proud of myself for finding the strength to stand up to Jason, for finding the courage to expose the truth, and for allowing myself to heal. There were still moments of anger, of course, moments when I thought about the years I had lost, the trust I had given him, the way he had used me. But those moments were fleeting. I no longer needed to hold on to that anger to define who I was. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the other person's actions. It was about freeing yourself from the grip of resentment. And in that freedom, I found peace, not just with Jason, but with myself. I had fought for what was mine, and I had won. Not just the money, but my own dignity, my self-respect. I had come out on the other side of the divorce stronger and more self-assured than ever before. As I moved forward with my life, I knew that I wasn't just walking away from my marriage. I was walking toward a future that was all mine. I could finally breathe, finally live without the weight of Jason's lies holding me back. And while I didn't know exactly what the future held, I knew one thing for sure. I was ready for it. The journey had been long, and the road hadn't always been easy, but in the end, I had emerged victorious. And now, as I looked ahead, I knew that this was just the beginning. The fire that had been lit inside me was one that would never burn out. It was a fire of resilience, of strength, and of the unwavering belief that I was worthy of happiness, no matter what anyone had tried to make me believe. As the weeks passed after the divorce, I thought I was finally moving on. I had gotten the financial settlement I deserved, I had exposed Jason's lies, and I had regained my life. I was rebuilding. I started working again, focusing on my career, going out with friends, and even rediscovering some of the passions I had put on hold for years. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I was in control, and I was learning to love myself again, independent of anyone's validation. But as often happens when you think the storm has passed, another one hits you from an unexpected direction. It started with a message, just a simple text from an unknown number. I didn't recognize the name attached to it, but the message was clear. It was a picture of Jason, and not in the context I expected. He was sitting at a table across from a woman I had never seen before, and in the background, I could see the same offshore bank account statements that had been sent to me during the divorce proceedings. I froze, staring at the image. Something wasn't right. The message read, "I think you need to see this. Jason hasn't been honest with you about everything." My mind raced. Jason? What was this? Why was someone sending me this? I had already exposed the $100,000 he had been hiding, and the divorce was final. What more could there possibly be? I couldn't ignore the curiosity building inside me. I had to find out what this was about. I responded, my fingers trembling as I typed, "Who is this? Why are you sending me this?" The response came quickly. "You won't believe it until you see for yourself. Jason has been hiding far more than just money from you. There's more you don't know." I knew I had to act, but I was overwhelmed with a mix of disbelief and anger. After everything Jason had put me through, after the lies, after the betrayal, was there really more? Was there something I had missed, something I had overlooked? I called my lawyer immediately. I had to verify this. I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I needed answers, and I needed them now. My lawyer was skeptical at first, but agreed to look into the new information. He advised me to be cautious, but I couldn't help it. I had to know what was going on. Within days, I had the truth. Jason hadn't just been hiding money from me. He had been involved in an illicit business deal, one that was much more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The woman in the picture was not just a random acquaintance. She was involved in laundering money, and Jason had been using our assets to fund these illegal activities. The $100,000 was just the tip of the iceberg. Jason had been under investigation for months, but he had managed to keep everything hidden. His arrogance, his confidence that he had escaped the consequences of his actions, had blinded him to the fact that I was still watching, still fighting. But now, with this new revelation, I realized that everything he had done was far worse than I could have ever expected. I felt like the ground beneath me was collapsing. The betrayal was no longer just financial. It was criminal. He hadn't just lied to me about money. He had dragged me into something far more sinister. I was left questioning everything. How much of our life together had been real? How much had been a carefully constructed lie, built on deceit and manipulation? I sat down, trying to process the magnitude of what I had just learned. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. It read, "You need to make sure this goes public. It's the only way to protect yourself and everyone else involved." I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I had been deceived for far too long. I had already exposed his financial deceit. But now it was time to expose everything: the illegal activities, the criminal connections, and the depth of Jason's manipulation. With the evidence in hand, I contacted the authorities. It wasn't easy. I had to make sure everything was documented and that I wasn't being used as a pawn in some larger scheme. But I knew this was the right thing to do. The truth had already been hard enough to swallow, but now it was time to let everyone else see the full picture. As the authorities began their investigation, Jason's world started to crumble. The smug, confident man who had once believed he could control everything was now facing the consequences of his actions. I wasn't the only one who had been fooled. He had built his life on lies, on secrecy, and on exploiting people. And now it was all unraveling. The twist was more than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just a divorce, this was a battle for justice. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized how much I had underestimated the extent of his deceit. But now the truth was coming to light, and it was no longer just my victory. It was everyone's. Jason had thought he could hide the truth forever. But in the end, it wasn't his lies that won. It was my strength, my persistence, and my refusal to back down. The weeks following my revelation about Jason's criminal activities were filled with chaos. The phone calls, the meetings with my lawyer, the endless paperwork. It all became a blur as the authorities began investigating Jason's offshore accounts and illegal dealings. My life had been turned upside down once again, but this time I wasn't running from the storm. I was in control. The truth had come out, and Jason could no longer hide behind his lies. As the investigation deepened, I found myself standing on the other side of the legal battle I had never imagined would be mine. Jason, who had once thought he was the master of the game, the one pulling the strings, was now on the defensive. The arrogance he had displayed during our divorce proceedings had vanished. His carefully constructed empire of lies was crumbling piece by piece. Every time I heard news of his involvement in the criminal scheme, I felt a strange mixture of anger and satisfaction. How could someone I had loved, someone I had trusted, be capable of such deceit? How had I not seen it? The realization that Jason had been living a double life, using our shared assets to fund his illegal ventures, sent waves of disgust through me. But it also gave me a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about the money he had hidden from me. It was about exposing him for who he truly was, about holding him accountable for everything he had done. My lawyer was thorough, and the evidence we gathered was damning. Jason's actions weren't just financially irresponsible, they were criminal. The deeper we dug, the more we found. He had been laundering money through shell companies, hiding assets under false names, and engaging in fraudulent activities that stretched far beyond our marriage. The man I had once called my partner was nothing more than a master manipulator, using me as a pawn in his twisted game. Jason's response to the legal proceedings was predictable. He tried to deny everything. He claimed the accounts were part of a business venture that I didn't understand. He tried to blame his financial advisors, his lawyers, anyone but himself. But the evidence was clear. The money he had hidden wasn't just from our marriage. It was from illegal activities that had affected more than just me. His web of deceit was far-reaching, and now it was unraveling in front of him. The courtroom battles were long and exhausting, but I had a feeling of resolve that I had never experienced before. Every time Jason tried to lie his way out of a situation, I had the truth on my side. Every document, every piece of evidence, every witness statement proved that I was right. Jason had underestimated me. He thought I was just going to walk away quietly, accept his version of the story, and let him take everything from me. But I wasn't going down without a fight. It wasn't just the financial victory that mattered anymore. It was about proving that I was more than the woman he had tried to manipulate. It was about showing the world that I could stand on my own, that I could rise above the betrayal, and that I was worth more than the scraps Jason had tried to offer me. It was about my self-respect, my dignity, and my power to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The turning point came during the final stages of the trial. Jason's arrogance had been his downfall. His defense team had tried to discredit my claims, but they couldn't ignore the mountain of evidence we had gathered. And when I took the stand to testify, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. It wasn't about making Jason suffer. It was about holding him accountable. It was about standing up for myself, for everything I had worked for, and for the truth that he had tried so hard to hide. As I spoke in court, I could feel the weight of the past few months lift off my shoulders. I wasn't just confronting Jason anymore. I was confronting my own fears. I had spent so long being scared of what might happen, of what the consequences of exposing his lies would be. But in that moment, I realized that the consequences were his to face, not mine. I had done what needed to be done. I had fought for my truth, and no matter what happened next, I would walk away knowing I had given everything I could to make things right. The final judgment came down a week later. Jason was found guilty of fraud, money laundering, and illegal financial dealings. He was ordered to pay restitution, and the court froze his assets, effectively dismantling the empire he had so carefully built. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. It wasn't just the money. It was the fact that justice had been served. Jason had been exposed for the man he truly was, and there was no escape for him anymore. I stood tall, not because I had won financially, but because I had reclaimed my life. I had faced the worst of the worst and come out on top. And in that victory, I had found something far more valuable than money or revenge. I had found my strength. The dust settled after the legal proceedings, but the emotional toll didn't dissipate as quickly as I had hoped. Jason had been exposed for what he was, a liar, a manipulator, and a criminal. And yet, as much as I had fought for justice, I found myself alone with the aftermath of everything that had happened. The victory, the legal success, didn't erase the hurt. It didn't fill the empty space inside me that had been left after everything had unraveled. I had won in every sense of the word, financially, legally, and emotionally. I had stood up for myself and taken control of my life, but the victory felt hollow. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, those emotions lingered like shadows, reminding me of the years I had spent in the dark. It wasn't just about the money Jason had hidden or the lies he had told. It was about everything I had given up to make that marriage work, everything I had sacrificed to keep the peace, to trust him, to believe in the illusion he had built. And now I was left with the pieces of a life I didn't recognize. I had spent so much time focusing on the external battle, on the fight for financial stability and legal justice, that I hadn't stopped to consider the internal toll this all had on me. The truth was, while I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine, I hadn't yet reclaimed myself. The years of emotional abuse, of feeling invisible, of being manipulated by someone I had once trusted, had left scars deeper than I had realized. I found myself struggling to trust again, trust in people, in love, in myself. How could I ever truly trust someone after everything Jason had done? How could I ever let anyone in when I had been so thoroughly deceived? And how could I trust myself to make better choices, to not fall into the same traps again? I had trusted him when I shouldn't have. I had believed in his lies for so long that they became my reality. How could I make sure I didn't make the same mistake again? The process of rebuilding was slow. There were days when I felt like I was making progress, taking small steps toward rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage, outside of the betrayal. But there were also days when the weight of everything hit me all over again. On those days, I questioned everything. The pain was still raw, still fresh. The emotional scars left by Jason's deceit weren't something that could be fixed by a legal victory or a financial settlement. They were part of me now, part of my story, and learning to live with them felt like a journey I wasn't sure I was ready for. I spent more time alone, reflecting on my past choices and my future. I realized that while the past had shaped me, it didn't have to define me. I had survived it. I had endured years of manipulation and deceit, but I had come out stronger. I hadn't let it break me. And that realization, though difficult, was empowering. I was more resilient than I had ever given myself credit for. I had the strength to start over, to rebuild my life the way I wanted it, not the way someone else had dictated. As I spent time reflecting, I also took the opportunity to reconnect with the things I had once loved. I started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. Writing was always my escape, my way of expressing everything I had kept bottled up inside. I hadn't realized how much I missed it until I started putting pen to paper. Writing allowed me to release the emotions I had been carrying and process everything that had happened. It was cathartic, and it reminded me of who I was before everything with Jason had begun. I also began to focus on my physical health, something I had neglected for too long. I started exercising again, taking long walks and hitting the gym to release the stress and frustration that had built up over the years. Slowly, I felt my body grow stronger, just as my mind was. The more I focused on taking care of myself, the more I began to heal, not just emotionally, but physically. I was reclaiming every part of myself that I had lost during my marriage. But the most important part of my healing came when I started forgiving myself. I had spent so long blaming myself for not seeing Jason's lies, for not walking away sooner, for not being stronger. I had thought that somehow it was my fault. But in reality, I had been manipulated. I had trusted the wrong person. But that didn't make me weak or foolish. It made me human. And it was time I stopped punishing myself for what had happened. The process of healing was far from easy, but it was the most important work I had ever done. I had survived the worst, and now I was learning to live again. Not just survive, but to thrive. I wasn't just reclaiming my financial independence or my legal rights. I was reclaiming my life, and that was worth everything. The weeks after the legal battles were behind me felt like both a burden lifted and a chapter closed. I had gained everything I deserved: justice, financial compensation, and a sense of closure. But there was one thing I had never expected: how hard it would be to re-enter life, to rebuild it from scratch. I had lived for so long in a world where my worth was tied to someone else's approval, someone else's needs. Now, I had to learn how to live for myself, to stand as my own person without the weight of Jason's lies and manipulation hanging over me. At first, it felt like I was walking through fog. Each day, I took small steps forward, unsure of which direction to go. There were moments when I wanted to fall back into the familiar routine, to slip back into my old life. But I knew that wasn't an option anymore. My old life had been built on lies, and that was something I could never return to. It was time to find something new. I began by focusing on myself, something I hadn't done in years. I started doing the things I loved, things I had pushed aside during my marriage. I began painting again, a hobby I had abandoned because Jason never appreciated it. I took long walks by the lake, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the freedom in every step. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with and began building new relationships, ones that weren't clouded by deceit and manipulation. The healing wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. I joined a yoga class, something I had always wanted to do but never felt I had the time for. Yoga allowed me to be present, to focus on my own well-being, to clear my mind of the noise and pain that had accumulated over the years. Slowly, I began to feel stronger, more balanced. My body, which had been worn down by the emotional weight of the past, started to feel alive again. There was a part of me that still struggled with the idea of being alone. The thought of loneliness was something I had carried with me throughout my marriage. But as I spent more time rediscovering myself, I realized that I wasn't truly alone. I had my own company, my own support system, and my own strength. I had learned to rely on myself, and that was something no one could ever take from me. One afternoon, I received a message from a friend I hadn't seen in years, Rachel. She and I had been close when I was younger, but we had drifted apart as life took us in different directions. Her message was simple. "Hey, I heard about everything that happened. I just wanted to say I'm so proud of you for getting through it. Let's meet up soon." I was taken aback. It had been so long since I had connected with anyone in my circle, and the thought of meeting someone from my past felt like a lifeline. I agreed to meet Rachel the following weekend, and as we sat in the cafe, catching up on life, I realized how much I had missed these real connections. Rachel listened without judgment, offering a kind ear and giving me the space to talk about everything I had been through. There was no pity, no awkward silence, just understanding. It was in that moment that I realized something important. Healing wasn't just about moving on from the past. It was about reconnecting with the people who truly cared about me, the people who saw me for who I was, not who I had been in my marriage. Rachel was a reminder that I wasn't alone, that I had a future ahead of me filled with possibilities. That meeting with Rachel sparked something in me. I realized I didn't have to figure everything out all at once. I didn't have to have all the answers. But what I did know was that I was on the right path. My journey had been long and it had been painful, but I was finally stepping into the life I deserved. A life of freedom, of joy, of independence. The emotional scars from my marriage would always be there, like faint shadows in the back of my mind. But they no longer controlled me. I no longer allowed the past to dictate my future. Each day, I learned to let go of the resentment, to release the anger that had been so consuming. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing Jason's actions. It was about freeing myself from the grip of the past. As the months went by, I continued to focus on my personal growth. I began setting new goals for myself, ones that were mine and mine alone. I started a small art project, something I had always dreamed of doing. It wasn't about making money or impressing anyone. It was about doing something for me, for the joy of creating. I also began to travel, visiting places I had always wanted to see. Each new experience reminded me of how much life there was to be lived, how much I had yet to discover about the world and about myself. I knew that I wasn't done healing, that the journey would continue for as long as I lived. But with each passing day, I felt stronger, more confident. I had been through hell, and I had come out the other side not broken, but whole. I had learned to embrace my past, to accept it, and to move forward with my head held high. In the end, it wasn't just about the victory in court. It was about reclaiming my life, my happiness, and my peace. It was about realizing that I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was complete on my own. And with that, I stepped into a new chapter, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to overcome anything life threw my way. As the months continued to pass, I found myself standing at a strange crossroads. My life had taken so many unexpected turns, and with every twist and turn, I had come out stronger. But even with everything that had happened, exposing Jason, reclaiming my financial independence, and rebuilding my life, there was still something I hadn't quite dealt with: the anger. The bitterness that had been a constant companion for so long still lingered in my chest, like a shadow that refused to fade. It wasn't that I hadn't made progress. I had. I had learned to trust myself again, to rebuild my sense of self-worth. But every now and then, the thought of Jason and everything he had done to me would rise to the surface, and with it would come the anger, the feeling of betrayal, of being used, of being left in the dark for so long. I had exposed him. I had won in court, and I had reclaimed what was mine. But there was still a part of me that wanted revenge, a part of me that wanted him to feel the same pain I had endured. But one evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, sipping a glass of wine and reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized something important. Holding on to that anger wasn't serving me. It wasn't making me stronger. It wasn't helping me heal. In fact, it was only holding me back, keeping me tied to the past, to the person I used to be, the one who had been manipulated and betrayed. It was time to let go. The decision wasn't easy. Letting go of the anger, of the need for vengeance, felt like I was giving up part of my power. For so long, I had used that anger to fuel my fight, to get through the darkest days. But I came to realize that while the anger had helped me survive, it was also preventing me from truly living. It was a weight that I didn't need to carry anymore. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, imagining myself releasing that anger, letting it float away like a balloon. It wasn't a magical fix, but in that moment, I felt a shift inside me, a release, a lightness. The burden of resentment, of wanting to make Jason pay for everything he had done, started to slip away. It was as though I was finally forgiving not just him, but myself. I was forgiving myself for staying in a toxic marriage, for not seeing the truth sooner, for letting him control my life for so long. I knew that forgiveness didn't mean excusing Jason's actions. It didn't mean that everything he had done to me was okay, but it meant that I was no longer letting him dictate how I felt. It meant that I was taking back control over my emotions, my life, and my future. The weeks following that realization were some of the most peaceful I had experienced in a long time. It wasn't that everything was perfect, or that the past was suddenly erased, but I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt before. I no longer had to carry the weight of anger with me. I was no longer bound to the pain of the past. Instead, I started focusing on the present and on the future. I began setting new goals for myself, things I had put on hold for too long. I had always dreamed of opening my own art gallery, showcasing the work of local artists. For years, I had let Jason's opinions and criticisms hold me back from pursuing that dream. But now, I was determined to make it happen. I started taking small steps toward making that dream a reality, researching the art scene in my city, reaching out to potential artists, and saving up money for a space. The more I worked on it, the more I realized that this was my time. I didn't have to wait for permission or approval from anyone else. I could create the life I had always wanted. And with each step I took toward building my new life, I felt more and more empowered. I wasn't defined by my past, by my marriage, or by the betrayal. I was creating something new, something that was entirely mine. I was making my dreams come true on my own terms, without anyone else's influence or control. There were moments when the memories of my marriage would still creep in, but they didn't have the same hold over me anymore. I had learned to see them for what they were: lessons, not scars. I had learned to see myself not as a victim, but as a survivor. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was creating a life I could be proud of, a life that was authentic to who I was. The anger, the resentment, it was gone. And in its place, there was peace. I had let go, not just of Jason, but of everything that had kept me trapped. I had freed myself. The road to redemption hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but I was no longer afraid. I had come out of the storm stronger, wiser, and more capable of facing whatever life threw my way. And in that freedom, I finally realized the truth. The only person who could truly define my happiness was me. Months had passed since the final settlement and the emotional turmoil of the past. I had moved into my own apartment, a cozy little place that felt like a sanctuary from the chaos of my previous life. It was a space I had created for myself, free of any remnants of the marriage I had once fought so hard to preserve. I had filled it with things I loved: art, books, plants, and soft lighting. It was simple, but it was mine. At first, living alone felt strange. After years of sharing a life with someone, the silence was deafening. There were nights when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the right choice. Had I truly healed, or was I just avoiding the pain? But as the weeks went by, the uncertainty started to fade, and I began to embrace the quiet in a way I hadn't before. It wasn't loneliness, it was peace. In my marriage, I had been so focused on keeping the peace, on maintaining the facade of a perfect life. I had silenced my own needs and desires to make sure Jason was happy. But now, in my solitude, I was finally learning to listen to myself, to my wants and needs. I was learning to live for me, not for anyone else. I immersed myself in new projects. The art gallery idea that I had once shelved came to life, little by little. I began networking with local artists, planning out how I would curate the space and how I wanted it to feel. It wasn't about creating a business. It was about creating a space where I could share the beauty and creativity I had always admired. It was a dream that had been buried beneath the weight of my marriage, but now it was beginning to take shape. I also started taking up new hobbies that I had put on the back burner for years. I enrolled in a photography class, something I had always wanted to explore but had never had the chance to. I spent weekends going out into the city, capturing moments that I found beautiful, whether it was the soft glow of the morning sun or the hustle and bustle of people going about their day. Each photograph I took was like a small victory, a reminder that I was rebuilding, step by step. But it wasn't just about work and hobbies. It was about reconnecting with myself. I started journaling more, reflecting on my past experiences and what I had learned from them. I realized that my marriage, though painful, had taught me valuable lessons. It had shown me my own strength, my own ability to endure. It had taught me that I could survive betrayal and still emerge from it whole. I also began reconnecting with old friends, those relationships that had been strained or neglected during my marriage. They had always been there for me, but I had distanced myself for reasons I didn't fully understand. I had been so wrapped up in Jason's world that I had forgotten about the people who cared about me. Now I was reaching out to them, rekindling those friendships, and finding joy in their company once again. One night, as I sat at my kitchen table, a glass of wine in hand, I found myself smiling. Not out of relief that the past was finally behind me, but because I was genuinely happy. It had taken time, yes, but I had learned to embrace my independence. I wasn't waiting for someone else to complete me, to define me. I was whole on my own. There were moments of doubt, of course. There were days when the shadows of my past crept in, when I wondered if I would ever truly be able to trust someone again. But I was learning that trust didn't have to come from someone else. It had to come from me, from trusting myself, my choices, and my ability to move forward. I had spent so many years looking for validation, for approval, but now I realized that the only approval I needed was my own. I didn't need anyone else's permission to live my life the way I wanted to. I was free, free from Jason's control, free from the expectations of others, and free from the person I had once been. The future felt open to me, full of possibilities. I had learned to dream again, to think beyond the confines of my old life. The things I had put off were now within my reach. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had taken control of my narrative, and I was no longer a victim of my circumstances. I was the author of my own story. As I closed the journal that night, I knew that I wasn't done growing. The road ahead wasn't perfect, and there would be challenges along the way. But I was ready. For the first time in years, I was excited about what the future held. I had reclaimed my life, and that was just the beginning. As the months passed, the feelings of uncertainty and doubt that had once haunted me started to dissolve. I wasn't quite sure when it happened, but one day I woke up and realized that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I had built something for myself, a life that didn't rely on anyone else's approval or validation. For the first time, I was living life on my own terms. I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if Jason's lies were going to come back to haunt me. I wasn't questioning my decisions or my worth. I was moving forward, unburdened by the past. The art gallery, once just a dream, was taking shape. It wasn't easy, nothing worthwhile ever is, but it was mine. And every step I took toward bringing it to life felt like an act of defiance against the years I had spent being controlled, manipulated, and belittled. The process of rebuilding wasn't just about work. It wasn't just about the art gallery or the new friendships I had rekindled. It was about learning to trust myself again. It was about reclaiming my sense of self-worth, my autonomy, and my confidence. For so long, I had been afraid to trust my instincts, afraid of making the wrong choices because of the mistakes I had made in my marriage. Jason had always been there, dictating decisions, overshadowing my voice, making me feel like I wasn't capable of making my own choices. But now, I was the one in control, and for the first time, I was making decisions with confidence. I began to trust my own judgment, whether it was in my business decisions, my social life, or even my personal growth. I realized that the fear I had once felt, the nagging voice in my head that told me I wasn't good enough, was simply a product of my past. It wasn't who I was. I wasn't the woman who had stayed silent and allowed herself to be overlooked. I was strong, capable, and full of potential. There were moments when doubt crept in, of course. The scars of the past were still there, and I didn't expect them to disappear overnight. There were days when I still felt vulnerable, when the pain of my marriage threatened to resurface. But instead of running from it, I faced it head on. I acknowledged the pain, the betrayal, the lies, and then I let it go. I realized that the only way to truly heal was to stop letting the past dictate my future. One day, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, taking in the reflection of the woman staring back at me. She wasn't perfect, but she was strong. She had been through hell and come out the other side, scarred but unbroken. For the first time in years, I saw someone I recognized, someone I was proud of. And for the first time, I felt comfortable in my own skin. I wasn't waiting for someone else to define me anymore. I wasn't waiting for approval from anyone, whether it was Jason, my parents, or anyone else. I had taken back control of my life, and now it was up to me to continue building the future I wanted. I was the author of my own story, and I was no longer afraid to turn the page. I also started to entertain the idea of love again. At first, the thought seemed impossible. After everything I had been through, the idea of opening myself up to someone else felt like a risk I wasn't sure I was ready to take. But as time went on, I began to realize that love wasn't something I had to seek from another person. It was something I had to cultivate within myself. I had to love and accept myself first, and only then could I be open to the possibility of a relationship with someone else. The idea didn't scare me anymore. I wasn't looking for a savior. I wasn't looking for someone to fix me or fill the emptiness that had been left by Jason. I was whole on my own, and if someone were to come into my life, they would have to complement the life I had already built, not complete it. As the art gallery project took shape, I found myself connecting with other artists, other creative individuals who had their own stories of struggle and triumph. Through them, I began to see that I wasn't alone. Everyone had their own battles, their own struggles. But it was how we chose to rise from those struggles that defined us. And for the first time, I felt like I was rising. The future was no longer something I feared. It was something I looked forward to. I was excited about what was to come, not because I had it all figured out, but because I knew I was ready for it. I had learned the hard way that life doesn't go according to plan, but that doesn't mean it can't still be beautiful. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time, I was living it with intention and joy. Jason's memory no longer held the power it once did. He had been a chapter in my life, but he no longer had a say in my story. The fire that had been lit inside me by his betrayal continued to burn, but now it was fueled by something greater. My own strength, my own resilience, and my own dreams. I had fought for myself, for my happiness, and for my future, and now the world was mine to conquer. As time passed, I came to realize something profound. The past doesn't define us. It shapes us, yes, but it doesn't determine where we go from here. The past is merely a series of lessons, some learned the hard way, others acquired through time and experience. But what mattered now was the future I was finally ready to embrace, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a warrior who had fought for her happiness and won. The art gallery opened its doors that summer, a dream I had long ago put on the back burner now taking shape into something real, something tangible. The space was everything I had envisioned and more, a reflection of the strength, passion, and resilience I had discovered in myself. Each piece of artwork on the walls told a story, each one a testament to the artist's perseverance. And as I stood there on opening night, looking at the crowd of people, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. I had built this, from the ground up. It wasn't just the gallery. It was my new life. I had fought for it, and I had made it happen. The struggle, the heartbreak, the betrayal, none of it had been for nothing. It had all led me to this moment. And as I watched the guests admire the art, I realized that I had finally become the person I was always meant to be. Jason was still out there, living with the consequences of his lies, but he no longer had a hold on me. He no longer occupied my thoughts, my energy, or my heart. I had released the anger and resentment I had carried for so long. Forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't about excusing the other person's actions. It was about freeing yourself from their grip, and I was free. In the months that followed, I continued to build my life, step by step, brick by brick. I traveled more, explored new passions, and made deeper connections with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could offer them. The loneliness I had once feared became a source of strength. I had learned to be my own company, to enjoy my own presence, and to embrace the stillness of life. I had become the architect of my own future, and that knowledge was more empowering than anything I had ever felt. One evening, as I reflected on how far I had come, I realized how much I had changed. I was no longer the woman who had been willing to settle for a love that didn't serve her. I was no longer the woman who had been afraid to speak up, afraid to stand up for what she deserved. I was the woman who had taken control of her own destiny, who had fought against the odds and come out victorious. And as I looked ahead, I knew that my journey wasn't over. Life would continue to present challenges, as it always does. But I had learned that the power to overcome them didn't lie in avoiding the pain, but in embracing it and rising from it. I wasn't just moving forward. I was evolving, growing, becoming the best version of myself. The woman I was today was stronger, wiser, and more self-assured than the woman I had been a year ago. And for the first time, I truly felt at peace. I had everything I needed to continue building the life I wanted: confidence, strength, and the unwavering belief that I deserved the happiness I had fought for. If you're someone who's still stuck in the past, still holding on to the pain of betrayal or loss, I want you to know this: you are stronger than you think. You have the power to reclaim your life, to build your future on your own terms. You don't have to wait for someone else's approval or for circumstances to change. You have everything you need inside of you to rise, to heal, and to thrive. It's time to let go of the past, to embrace the future, and to take the first step toward the life you truly deserve. The journey won't always be easy, but I promise you, it will be worth it. Take the first step. Reclaim your power. You've got this.